Okay, let's go. So there you go. Hello, people. Here, Fanny Anzai interviews Trent Fowler, machine learning engineer and author in the FuturatiPodcast.com with Thomas Frey or Fry. I'm sorry if I you can correct me.
Right.
So in the Futurati podcast, they talk about science and technology. And every week they come to talk about AI, cryptocurrencies, space exploration, quantum computing, biotechnology, and a bunch of other subjects that futurists love to be, trying to peek over and know what is new, what is the last things coming up. And you guys have a lot of this tech social philosophical conversation. And we're going to cover a little bit of those topics, but more for a lay person conversation. How do you use this? What is the practical application of Bitcoin and all this crazy stuff? Thank you very much for coming. And please introduce yourself if I forgot anything.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't have much to add to that introduction. I'm a former machine learning engineer, and I'm the co-host of the Futurati Podcast, which you can find anywhere you get podcasts or at FuturatiPodcast.com.
That's right. And so what is a machine learning engineer to start? Because sounds like a new type of engineering that I was not introduced before.
Sure. So a machine learning engineer, in essence, is a person who tries to use algorithms applied to data sets to get a program to learn from experience. So if you imagine trying to solve a problem like classifying a picture or telling if a human is in a picture, something like that, it winds up being incredibly difficult to do with a regular computer program. And a regular computer program is generally just a set of instructions or a set of if-then statements, which determine the flow of execution in a program. And with machine learning, instead of trying to come up with a set of rules, which will allow a program to determine if a human is in a picture, you feed it a bunch of data and it learns some sort of representation of the images. And then it's able to generalize to other images that it's never seen before. And so what I did as a machine learning engineer was quite varied. I worked on recommender systems, for example. A recommender system that you're familiar with will probably be Netflix, which learns over time what you're interested in and the properties of a show that you'll like and continue to watch, and then it recommends other shows that have that property. Well, there's no human back there determining that for you. Instead, somebody has built an algorithm, fed it a lot of data, and the algorithm has learned to do that parsing for you so that it can scale better and it can learn these representations that are very hard to hard code in. So that's what I did professionally for a while. And more recently, I've become the director of communications at a crypto asset startup. So I think that my machine learning engineer days might be behind me, but I had a great run and it was a lot of fun.
That's amazing. So it's more than just the AI. It's an AI that it's not completely programmed. It would be like it's really learning by its experience.
It's learning from a data set. So I say experience, what I mean by that is a data set. So we can circle back around to the question of artificial intelligence and how that interfaces with machine learning. But first, I'll just note that when I'm talking about experience, I mean a set of data points. And what you're trying to do is to get the algorithm to learn a pattern from those data points such that it can generalize that pattern to data points it's never seen before. And so a very simple example might be something like a set of data points relating the price of a house to its square footage, something like that. And so there'll be some houses with 5,000 square feet that go for $400,000, say, and others with about the same amount of square footage that'll go for like $6,000, something like that. And there'll be some kind of relationship. It may not be perfectly linear, but there'll be some kind of relationship between the two. And you would feed it to a linear regression algorithm, and that algorithm would draw a line of best fit through those data. And if you fed it a new data point that it had never seen before, it would be able to predict with some degree of accuracy what the price of the house would be. That's a very simple example, but that's the basic idea behind it.
We have a lot of more applicability to all this AI that we already use in our daily lives than this crazy kind of a obscure AI that would dominate humans, sometimes of fears. And what is a realistic, what would be a realistic fear of AI if we should fear AI in any way?
Yeah, so machine learning is sometimes lumped in with artificial intelligence, but it's really just an application of statistics. And proper AI, as I understand it, is usually a grander project. It's trying to architect some program or set of programs that's able to reason more nimbly. So a machine learning system can be really complicated and really sophisticated and really powerful, as we've seen with language models like GPT-3. But GPT-3 is never going to make a reservation over the phone. It's never going to talk you out of talk you out of money. It's never going to beat you in a game of poker. It's very specialized. Even as complex and powerful as it is, it still only does this one thing, and it's just effectively useless outside of that one thing. The promise and the peril of artificial intelligence is that you will have a more robust and flexible reasoning agent. You'll have something that can learn new things that it's never seen before, not just new data points that are similar to the data points it's seen before, but an entirely new class of activities, a whole new category of action. So you might be able to take an AI that so far has just been playing chess or maybe running a small warehouse or something like that, and then send it to kindergarten, and it would pick up those skills as well, and maybe do them in a much more truncated time frame than it takes a human being. And with that demarcation having been made explicit, I would say that there are a number of different reasons to be concerned about artificial intelligence. And the most immediate ones center around things like misinformation, like the ability of a powerful language model to churn out news stories that are fake, that have nothing to do with reality, but that rile up certain political bases, or are otherwise able to silo a person off from their social network without them knowing it. So you could imagine a social network of the future that is not only able to shadow ban you, but do it in such a way that you're still interacting with really convincing bots, and you never even know that you're no longer interacting with people. You're no longer interacting with somebody on the other side of that. So you think this message is getting out there, and you've got all this back and forth with real people, and none of that's happening. And I think that is very much on the horizon. And we've seen several instances of similar things happening, and scandals have broken over those. And I think that with the rise of really, really powerful language models like GPT-3, that's only going to become more of a pressing concern. And going a little further out from there, you could imagine a much more flexible and robust agent that's able to do something like recursively self-improve by augmenting its underlying source code, that could rapidly become much more intelligent than a human being. It could go from some infrahuman baseline up to a superhuman level in a relatively short amount of time. And I think that is what really gets the AI safety crowd worked up, is that particular problem. And we can go into more detail about that if you want, but I just wanted to point out that there's like this spectrum of plausible near or medium future risks that we need to account for, with the more immediate ones being a bad application, and the more remote ones being fears that are around the agent itself. Like it might have some set of goals which are not consistent with our goals, but it's far too smart and far too powerful to stop. And so we're just fighting with something that's basically like a god over resources. And I wouldn't lay good odds on humanity in that scenario.
Oh, that is much more than I was expecting. To just like, oh, maybe it's the AI on the cars. People are afraid of automatizing more service and in vehicles, but that they went to great. Like, I love it. It's it's a great discussion, conversation for sure. What do you think about, for example, in this scenario of like the cars? I bet you're gonna talk about how accuracy comes with time, just like probably the science itself. We just get better at doing, and we'll get safer and probably in more accurate every time we do it. But when it comes to even this fear on the technology and the AI, it's much less to be used in that bad way, just because we're still very good at kind of detecting an AI, or has this thing, or the AI actually surpassed our knowledge of which pace and where we are in that type of development. It really can fool us.
Sure. So you're describing a kind of arms race dynamic where you've got language models that are getting much better, and they're able to fool some humans, but they're not able to fool all humans. And maybe we've got algorithms that are able to detect it somehow. There's just some sort of telltale signature in the output that lets us know this probably wasn't a human being. 10 years ago, that would have been really trivial. Like there were no algorithms that were good enough to fool a human being. I don't think that's so much the case anymore. I've seen GPT-3 output that is quite good, and I'm not sure I would be able to tell that it was generated by an algorithm and not a human being. Other times I can tell, and I've built language models myself that do stuff like those. Nothing like GPT-3, but much simpler ones that nevertheless are fairly good. I think that for now, we are keeping up pretty well with that. I think that the defensive tools we have are at least on pace with the offensive tools that are being developed. But I don't know that that will hold forever. And I suspect that eventually you will have blogs, you'll have newspapers, you'll have maybe entire podcast episodes, all of it just between algorithms or algorithms and human beings. And it will be really, really difficult for anyone to tell that this wasn't generated by a human being. And you're seeing some of that actually in the visual art. So I don't know if you're familiar with DALL-E. Have you been following that at all?
Who's that?
DALL-E, it's a DALL-E. It's the name of a program. And
Okay,
it can take natural language inputs of really remarkable sophistication and subtlety and generate images from them. So I could say like, generate a pretty podcast host in front of a stained glass window of an owl, and it would produce something kind of like what you look like. But you can also do other ones too, like Winnie the Pooh and Darth Vader fighting over the last Bitcoin, like something crazy like that on a lava planet, and do it in the style of Van Gogh, and it will come up with something pretty plausible to that effect. It looks almost exactly like what you said. Now there will be some outputs that are there'll be some outputs that aren't very good, and you have to pick the one that looks the best. But the one that looks the best is incredible. And I don't know of any way that you would be able to look at that and say that was generated by a computer and not a human. A person didn't do that. So in the realm of images, we may arguably already be there. And I think it's only a matter of time before they're also doing natural voice synthesis, so that you wouldn't know that you're not talking to a human being on the phone. Those are pretty good as well. The artificial voices are pretty good as well. And I think that you'll even have maybe movies that come out of this, animated films, things like that, that would be almost impossible to tell from the real thing, with complex plots, with subplots, with character arcs, with development, with heartbreaking moments and triumphs and a soundtrack and all of it. And it would, like, this algorithm would be able to generate 20 or 30 of them probably over the course of a few days. And you'd pick the best one. Yeah. So I think we are pretty rapidly moving into that future, more rapidly than any of us presupposed. And one thing we have to worry about in that future is the possibility of this being used for malignant purposes. Another is just that there could be huge economic disruptions as a result of it.
Yeah, I think the fear mostly, like, or maybe somehow realistic, is the replacement. Some people are afraid of, if you automatize all the cars and trucks and cashiers and many of the service, you put a lot of people out of work. But I think the evolution has, like, as humans, we always have evolved from, we lose something and we create out of that. And the people being put probably to have to find something else, it's not a bad thing. Not like it's not the joke of like learn how to code, find something else to do. But in some sense, yeah, I see that maybe many people, when I see mainly in Brazil, people that are stagnated in positions that supposed to be transitory when it comes to driving or fast food service and other types of service industry, that you would see people getting better with time,
Right.
and they end up stagnated economically. I guess it's not, I don't see that as something bad. I think it's something positive to society in general. So let's try to move from this subject, just because we have a good list here of things to cover. I would like to know, because I saw you were write, where do you write, how people can see the things you write, and what is that about? You published something?
Yeah, so these days I don't blog very much. Once upon a time I did blog quite a lot. I published a book in 2017, which I suppose I could talk about. In 2016, I designed what I called the STEM Punk project, which was a year-long learning endeavor in which I studied computing, electronics, mechanics, and artificial intelligence. I modeled it after the MIT project, if you're familiar with that, Scott Young's project, where he learned something like 4 years of MIT computer science in 1 year. My project was nowhere near as ambitious as that. but it took inspiration from it. And so I designed a curriculum for myself, and I got, computer science books, and I got little hardware kits that would have me soldering circuits together and learning how voltage works and amps work and all of this sort of thing. So I assembled the materials and designed the curriculum, and then I just executed the project and blogged about it as I went through. And I think all that is still up under, it's Rulers to the Sky was the old blog that I don't really write it anymore.
Was that like a kind of a path to podcasting?
Not directly. That was a path towards more interest in technical subjects. And so that was part of the impetus that got me into programming, was just learning those things and really liking it and liking the process of it. And that sharpened my quantitative skills and my technical skills. And then when I decided to pivot over into machine learning and data science in 2018, I had at least some foundation for it, which was not there previously. And that helped a lot in that regard. Podcasting, I got into podcasting through a more circuitous route. But I'll just wrap up and say that if you want to find where I write now, I don't blog as often, but the FuturatiPodcast has a blog, and I publish there with some frequency. So if you wanted to catch some of my writings, that'd be a good place to do it.
You guys have published just this morning the interview with Samo Burja,
Oh, yeah.
number 9. So from all these guests, and because you know them, and probably like maybe not one, but maybe more than one, who would be like the person that you were like proud, kind of a brag about, like, look, I had this guy, my guest, like, and you learned from it something like new or you would like to share?
Yeah. I wrote a little bit about this the other day, and I said that it was like trying to pick a favorite child, because all the podcast episodes have been so great. And I've really just enjoyed speaking with everyone that we've spoken to, and been grateful that they were willing to give their time. And the answer depends a little bit on who I'm talking to. So among crypto folks, I will usually either reference Lynn Alden or George Selgin. Lynn Alden is rapidly becoming kind of a legend in cryptocurrency analysis. She is just an absolutely brilliant investor, one of the smartest people in the space. And she's always putting out these very incisive threads on whatever's happening in crypto, like how it's responding to inflation, or how it's responding to some comments made by the Fed Open Market Committee, something like that. She has a really, really incredibly detailed knowledge of macroeconomics and microeconomics and finance and investing in crypto and most other things too. She's just one of those people. And she's attracted this huge audience, and she does a lot of interviews, but I don't think she's done many with a show that's as small as ours. We're not a huge podcast. And so it was a really good get to have her on. And it was one of those situations where we would just ask her a question and let her talk for like 25 unbroken minutes, because she's just incredibly articulate and really, really good at getting into details off the top of her head. And when it was done, I said something like, it's like being punched in the brain by Wikipedia, but in a good way. Like just listening to her talk, I wish I could just listen to her talk for a solid day and like never even interrupt. And then George Selgin is a famed monetary economist who is not a crypto maxi. He's sort of he takes a very measured and scholarly approach to cryptocurrencies. And for that reason, I think he's very valuable, because what you tend to get are people who are just gung-ho about it. Bitcoin fixes this, it fixes everything, I'm going to devote my whole life to it. Or people that think it's a bunch of dumb shit and nobody should look at it and it's a scam and you're going to lose all your money. Bitcoin tends to bifurcate the world into those two camps. And Dr. Selgin is both an economist with a great deal of knowledge about how money works and the history of money, and he takes a really measured approach to crypto. So we got into the specifics with him. Like, do you think Bitcoin has any chance of becoming a reserve currency? Why or why not? How does Bitcoin track the evolution of money as it's understood historically by economists like him? You know, do you think there are any Bitcoin use cases that are really promising? You know, we were able to get into this with somebody who's a very smart semi-skeptic, like semi-enthusiast, semi-skeptic. So those are two people there. Samo obviously is a titan. He is one of the most incisive social thinkers in the world, as far as I can tell. And he takes an incredibly unusual approach to analyzing civilizations and social structures and how they evolve over time and what the implications are for different evolutionary trajectories and this sort of thing.
Very fun interview.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
I loved it. I loved doing it. I'm glad it's out there now. The first interview we did with him was episode 76, and it's the one that's been viewed the most times, more than every other episode put together. So I have high hopes for the second one, which, as you said, we just published this morning. And I would say one of the ones that's been the most consequential was way back it might have been episode 6 with Dr. Mark Jackson, who's an expert in quantum computing. And I went into that episode pretty skeptical of quantum computing and came out of it convinced that we're not that far away from seeing real applications of quantum computing, which has led me to get involved with a quantum computing startup accelerator here in Denver. I live just outside of Denver, and it's fostered an ongoing interest in that technology. So that may be the one that changed my mind the most. But I mean, any of them I could tell you great things about. The one with Neil Watson, episode 10 was really good. The one with the founders of Aught is fantastic. They're building a natural language processing interface for basically all of human knowledge. So they've taken these advanced language models we were talking about earlier, and they're building a user interface on top of it so that you can basically go to it and ask it questions like, what's the impact on dopamine of cigarette smoking? And it will just go out to all these scientific papers, and it will pick out all the ones that are relevant to that, and it will summarize them, and it will rank them in order of importance, and it will tell you which parts are most relevant to it. It will tell you which ones don't agree with hypotheses, how they all relate to each other, and it does all this in 8 or 10 seconds. I mean,
Wow.
yeah,
Meta-analysis of studies.
It's incredible. It's incredible. And they've only just gotten started. They've barely begun to do all the things they want to do. So that was a really impactful one as well. And I've continued to track their progress as a company over all these months since that interview. So those are a couple of leads if you want to get into it.
That's pretty amazing. People check out. I'll definitely post, attach some for people to check out after. So how do you decide who you're going to interview next? You get suggestions from your fans, followers, something naturally just fishing online? How's that?
All of those things. It's pretty eclectic, actually. So sometimes people reach out to us and they'll say, I'm a futurist. I'm super interested in the application of AI to education. Would you be interested in talking to me? And we say, yes, we love that. That's a topic that's come up at least half a dozen times in the podcast. Other times it will be us fishing for people. We'll go out and say, this person's incredible. Can we talk to them? We've actually got a couple in the pipeline now that are scheduled for the coming weeks, which we got through that means. We identified them and said, these people are awesome. We want to talk to them, and reached out to them. And it's surprising how often people will say yes, even really famous people. You'd never think that this person would have time for you. But we just wrapped an interview with Robin Hanson, who's a really well-known futurist. And I was too sick to make it to that one, actually. So it's one of the few I've missed. But he's a really well-known futurist, and he agreed to talk to us. And so we talked about cryptocurrencies and the future of the world and the universe and all that Robin Hanson stuff. So it really varies a lot how we get them. But yeah, I would just say that if you have a little media project like this, or if you're just curious to talk to these people, they're probably not going to hop on the phone with you, but you'd be surprised how many famous people will answer your emails if you reach out to them. Scholars are usually interested, especially if you're asking good questions. If you provide evidence that you've read their work, you've done your homework a little bit, like you dug up their books and bought them, and you're going to ask them questions they don't get asked all the time, they're usually willing to find an hour at some point in the next 8 months to talk to you. And that's one of the great advantages of having a podcast, as you've discovered, is that you've got an excuse to just talk to incredible people. Like even if you don't know how you're going to make it worth their time, the mere fact that you've done 90 episodes or like 95 like we've done, we've got this long history. And so if we want to talk to a president or a head of state or the head of a company, the founder of a major crypto asset project, I mean, sometimes they say no. We get no's a lot too, but more often than you think they say yes. So we've got this amazing vehicle for having incredible conversations, and it's been a huge asset.
Agree. It is quite amazing. So we're gonna run out of time, but then we come back. I think we're gonna just make a little break. I want to come back with talking about blockchain, what it is, and what is good for. How can people use this in their normal lives? So I think I'm gonna just finish the recording here and hop back on the next time.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay.